Well, having heard what I've heard this morning about the situation here in the Basque region, it seems to me that compared with many other parts of the world, indeed many other parts of Spain, you have made enormous progress, really, in terms of having children with disabilities located in regular schools to a large extent in that respect. And it strikes me that, having worked in different parts of the world, every country and every region is at a different stage of development in relation to the challenge of inclusion in that sense, really. And every time you take a step forward, you meet new problems, new challenges which have to be addressed in that respect, really. I find it useful to think about inclusion as a series of stages, 3 stages really. The first stage is being present, getting the children into the school, and that clearly is a stage that here in this region you've achieved to a large extent. But clearly children can be present and ignored or overlooked. So the next stage is when children are actually present and participate, where they're seen to have something to contribute, where they're welcomed, where their voice is heard in that respect. Now that's a much more challenging stage in that respect. So I'm suggesting presence is the first step, then you have to encourage a high level of participation. But the ultimate goal really is achievement. You know, the children are present, they participate, and they are learning things which are going to be useful to them in that respect. Now, the further you go up those stages, the more challenging it is of the status quo, really. Getting children into schools probably requires additional support so that the teachers in the school will welcome the children. But getting children to participate really requires changes of attitudes, changes of policy, and changes of practice. So it's much more challenging. And then helping all children to achieve certainly requires the changes in the curriculum and the changes in the support for teachers and so on, really. It seems to me that you are at that stage of getting more participation and hopefully more learning, more achievement. Ultimately, the most important factor in all of this is the teacher in the classroom. We can have good national policies, but the policy that matters most is the one that the teacher has when she goes into the classroom and closes the door. So in order to make progress in terms of participation and learning, we have to support teachers. So that has implications for the initial training of teachers, but it also has implications for the continuing support of teachers. What we know from the research is that in schools that are driven by a commitment to inclusion, there is a strong emphasis on supporting teachers. It's a particular kind of support that's needed. Too often it is interpreted as being sending teachers on courses to learn new techniques. I'm not opposed to that, but it's actually peripheral. What the research points to is the need for a much more sophisticated form of teacher development. And it has to be located in the school and to some extent in the classroom. We can learn quite a lot about this from the experience of Japan. In Japan they have a tradition whereby teachers are expected to join what are called lesson study groups. This involves groups of teachers planning lessons together in order to take account of the needs of every child. They plan together, sharing their expertise and their ideas. What then happens is each teacher teaches the lesson with the other members of the group observing the lesson. The observers concentrate on looking at the reactions of the children to the lesson. After the lesson, the teachers meet and discuss the lesson, and then they change their plan before the next teacher teaches the same lesson with another group of children. In between each lesson, the group are thinking about what else can we do to include every child. What we're talking about is a fundamental rethinking of the task. The traditions of special education continue to create barriers to progress. I mean, that's why I'm saying to you, you need to find examples of good practice here and to use those to stimulate debate in the system, I think. I think families, in the current policy context, families have real dilemmas about where their children should be placed. Often because they're getting alternative advice from different specialists. We, as parents, we're all very conservative about our children. We don't want to take risks. So I can understand when a parent wants to choose special provision if they believe that's going to be the safest place. But that's why I would want to push people to connect special provision to the mainstream. We have to have more connection in the system. It shouldn't be so segregated. There are very interesting developments in other parts of the world on this. So, for example, in parts of Australia and the United Kingdom, increasingly they are locating special schools inside the building of the mainstream school. So the argument is, in that way, you can get the best of both worlds. So the children still have the specialist support of the special school staff, but there is the possibility for them to participate in more opportunities because they're inside the building. I think there is more could be done to have connections even when the buildings are separate. So what I'd be saying to parents is, if you choose special provision, you should still demand that your child has the opportunity to participate in a wider range of experiences. The question that parents have to ask is, ultimately, do I want my child as an adult to live in the real world or in a very separate world? I think as a country, Spain has made enormous progress in that respect. I go to countries where, when I go in the shops on a Saturday, I will never see a disabled person. That isn't the case here in Spain. Well, what follows from what I've said is we need to do research about what can help teachers and support teachers in making their lessons more inclusive. And what follows from that is the people who should be doing research should be teachers themselves. And so people like me working in universities have to create a different kind of relationship with the system, where instead of doing research on schools, we should be doing school research with schools. I mean, clearly the biggest challenge in the education system is that of secondary schools. The curriculum gets more complex, the schools are bigger. I think research that can help us to understand the challenges that secondary schools are experiencing is going to be very helpful. But it's not going to help us unless it leads on to other research which asks the question, so what are we going to do about these difficulties? You have available here, in the Basque language I think, the Index for Inclusion, which was developed to help schools to review themselves and move forward. And that index provides a lot of indicators, but they're summarised in relation to three interconnected factors. Does the school have policies for promoting inclusion? Does the school have practices which will enable children to be included? And does the school have a culture of valuing difference? But what I would add to that is the importance of inclusive leadership.